please welcome to the Future Proof stage, Mary Kate Gulick and Wilbur Swan.
You know, there's a great big couch up here, but I'm gonna stand anyway. Can you guys see past my big noggin if I stand here? Yeah, ish? Okay, I'm gonna stand over here then. But really nice to see everybody today. We're gonna talk about marketing that drives growth based on 2 studies and lessons that we learned from top growing RIAs and almost 20 million leads. Wilbur, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Is my mic Yes, it is. Hi, everybody. Wilbur Swan, CEO, founder of Catchlight, incubated in Fidelity Labs, although we can work with anybody, but we're in Fidelity Labs. And it's,
Very good.
So let me just say one thing. It's our data that's applied. The analysis, you saw the 19.2 million. We've actually analyzed close to 90 million leads. We took a subsegment of that, and that's informed this study. So hopefully I can give you some great insights.
Thank you. And I'm Mary Kate Gulick. I'm the founder of MK Wealth Marketing and a fractional CMO at Moneta Group. So, like Wilbur said, 90 million leads analyzed. We were looking at a specific 20 million leads. And beyond that, we also did a look at this gray study here. That's a more qualitative study that was looking at a pretty significant sample of the Barron's top 100 RIA firms, how they're set up for growth, what their structure is, how they're investing, what their practices are, what their tactics are, what their spends are, all the gritty details about growth marketing. Now that report, that study, is not out yet, so y'all are gonna get a sneak preview of what we found from that one. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the findings pissed me off a little bit. So we're gonna take a look at them and see what we can't do about them. So first thing, this is one of my favorite quotes. You're the one who actually introduced me to this one.
So why are you here? Hopefully you're here because you're obsessed about organic growth. I mean, I've heard some CEOs we work with about 300 firms. We work with 13 of the top 30 RIAs. And the really thoughtful ones are like, organic growth is the lifeblood of our business. It's the leading indicator. It enables everything we're going to do here. So, you can think about it that way. You can think about the future of your business, the future of your employees. Or, if you're thinking about exits potentially, David Doe had this nice stat, which I think kind of puts a value on it, right? If you can achieve a 1% lift in organic growth, you can achieve a 7% lift in your valuation. So obviously if you can get 2, 3, 4% lift in organic growth, it does great things for the value of your firm.
Good way to put it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we learned looking at some of the top firms. As we were walking through that qualitative study, everybody had such a significantly different approach to marketing, but there was a dividing line between the growers and the non-growers, and you can kind of see it here. The blue ones were the non-growers. They had overall growth last year in 2024. They did not grow organically in any meaningful way at all. On the right-hand side rather, the green and red, those are the ones that did grow. And based on their practices, how they staffed, how they invested, everybody kind of fell into one of these 4 profiles. Your level 1, marketing generalists. Your level 2, multidisciplinary teams. Level 3, growth-focused explorers. And level 4, those data-driven experts. And the way that showed up is that our marketing generalists, they were the smallest ones that we looked at. Now, because this was the Barron's top 100, these are bigger firms than average. But a lot of what we talk about from a findings perspective is just as relevant to smaller firms. It just needs to be implemented at the appropriate scale. So they averaged around 5.7 AUM, and they had reasonable AUM growth, but the bulk of it was market growth. 2024 was a lovely year for market growth, and they just kind of rode that wave. So that is what the world looked like for them, but their average marketing budget was less than 1% of revenue. If we look at level 2, our multidisciplinary teams, that's a much bigger firm, about 27 billion, and their average organic growth, still negative, they still rode the market growth wave, but significantly better than their level 1 counterparts. They invested a little bit more too, generally about twice as much. Level 3, you'll notice that these firms were actually smaller. So they don't level up as size by AUM, they level up by sophistication and what they're doing with their growth engines. That's how these profiles were built. So these are smaller firms, their organic growth was significant. That 10% is outside any M&A activity and outside any market growth for the year 2024. These folks were cranking. And as you'll notice, their average marketing budget was 1 to 3%. And finally, we have our data-driven masters. These are, for all intents and purposes, the ones that we would refer to as aggregators, right? They are extremely focused on M&A, and they split their marketing and growth efforts by inorganic and organic. They put a lot of money into inorganic growth because at that size, it is much harder to get organic growth percentages. So they take a little bit of a different approach, but they still are in the positive for 2024 growth. So I want you to look at this. I've organized these by the levels. This is level 1 and 2. They are left of the line. Levels 1 and 2 did not grow in 2024. Levels 3 and 4 did. That is a very binary breakdown. We have this one little outlier over here in the top left. That is one of the country's largest aggregators, and they did more M&A last year than anyone else. And so that is really where their focus was, which is why they are looking a little laggy on organic growth. But it's a pretty stark contrast. And when we start to look at why, one of the things that we saw, and this is kind of a no-duh statement, that, hey, the ones who grow invest more in marketing. Well, they don't just invest more, they invest orders of magnitude more. They invest 3 to 5 times more in marketing than non-growers. And they're spending that on technology to make sure that they're able to measure and optimize. They're spending it on more expert staff, which we'll talk about a little more agency, more media. So they tend to have the largest in-house teams, and they are really operating in lockstep with their business development teams, which is not the case for the others.
Insight number 2, fastest growing firms have 7x more lead sources. Now you might say, looking at that prior slide, this is only the large firms, right? Well, we work with firms anywhere from, 10, 50 million under management up to, the larger firms are highlighted in the prior slide. And I'd say this trend, it plays out on both ends of the spectrum. They're dedicating a lot of time and effort and creativity to how they're sourcing leads. And then what's important, I think we'll go to the next slide, is that they're systematically analyzing those leads, they're setting targets, they're measuring what happens, they're optimizing the process, and then they're rinsing and repeating. That's the key, rinse and repeat. So learn, rinse and repeat. So if I could pass on one insight, I think this is the big one of the deck.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because it's not like nobody's telling you to throw more lead sources at it, because that's not going to get you anywhere if you haven't developed the infrastructure to automate some of those processes and be able to prioritize those leads in a way that you can work with them efficiently. Because otherwise, you're just bringing in a whole lot of stuff that nobody is equipped to handle, and that's not going to get you anywhere either. So the reason they can handle 7 times more leads is because they've paid attention to their technology, to their staffing, and their partners, and they're able to work those leads very efficiently. So build your process out first so that you can actually do something with the 7 times more leads. This is just what that ends up looking like. I mean, 7 times kind of looks like, 7 times. 7 times is a lot more. It's a lot more.
Yeah, I think we'll get into the study and break down what these sources are and the trends we're seeing, but for today, we'll stick to that.
For sure. Okay, insight number 3. The organic growers have specialized experts, not Swiss Army knives. And this idea of a Swiss Army knife came up when I was talking to a lot of these level 2 firms, level 2 and level 1 firms, that they have a marketing person. And that marketing person maybe was really the office manager and they just got saddled doing marketing. Or they brought in a marketing coordinator who is not experienced, doesn't have a great deal of background or education, but they learned how to work the CRM and they know how to put together an email newsletter. So let's do it. So it's that person who kind of does everything. They're not operating from a strategy. They don't have any real leadership in place. They're kind of operating off of what I call executive whim. An executive or an advisor, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? So it's kind of executive says jump, the marketing Swiss Army knife jumps. And those are not firms that are growing. Those are firms who are doing marketing activities that are not generating growth. It's largely what I like to call an arts and crafts department. So the firms that are actually growing, instead of hiring these kind of generalist roles, they're hiring very skilled experts. They're looking for people with background in performance marketing, often in other industries, who know how to grow AUM among high net worth individuals. And that is oftentimes going to be very, very deep and detailed digital marketing with a lot of ads optimization experience. They're bringing in data scientists so that they're able to measure these things, or they're partnering with data scientists so they can figure out how to measure these things. It's a different level of skill. They're not focused on copywriters and graphic designers. They're focused on scientists.
Insight number 4, the fastest growing firms are monetizing non-traditional leads. You might ask, what's a traditional lead? Well, if you take a step back and look at where the growth of the industry's come from, a lot of firms have targeted those folks just approaching retirement, typically 500,000 to $1 million in assets, maybe higher if they're going more high net worth or ultra high net worth. If you look at this slide in terms of the patterns that we see across, again, anonymized, collected, but if you look at the patterns across all of these prospects, the fastest growing firms are really, if you squint at it, what they're targeting are the Henrys, the high earners, not yet rich. They're going into the folks that are in their 40s, and they're also targeting those that have less than 500,000 in assets. So what they're doing is they're betting on the future, right? They can have higher conversion rates, lower cost of acquisition, and then systematically work with those folks as they accumulate wealth and basically place their bets. I think it's a great insight from the study.
Yeah, and it goes back to that idea of knowing your data and having people who can, people, tools, partners who can mine that data and find out what a good lead actually is. Because if it's just a 65-year-old with X amount under assets, that's, everybody's going after the same people. That's a lot of duplicative hunting going after the same leads. But we also know that a 40-year-old, a 35-year-old who makes so much on this particular career trajectory, who just started owning a business, whatever, that there is a lot of future wealth there. How can we identify those people early on so that we can go after those leads where there's less competition? And when we get that lead, those assets are going to grow. They're not going to start drawing down immediately. So that's one of the reasons that the firms who have figured out how to monetize those future profitable leads are the ones that are growing fastest. Okay, number 5, the growers, they have marketing teams that are accountable for growth metrics. Level 1 and level 2, they either didn't measure anything, or what they measured were things like very woolly brand awareness metrics, or what I typically refer to as vanity metrics. Well, we have more followers on LinkedIn. Cool, that didn't bring in any AUM, but those are the types of things that they're looking at. A lot of web traffic and basic things like that are measuring the activities of marketing. They're not measuring the effect of those activities on AUM in the door. What's different about the growers is they're not looking at things like that. They don't care about follower count. What they care about is the cost per lead, the cost per client acquisition, the lifetime value of the client, and the average revenue per client, because those are the things that matter. If I'm bringing in leads that never convert, I'm losing, and if I can't see that that's what's happening to what I as a marketer bring in the door, then there's no way for me to know if I'm being successful. So level 3 and level 4 teams have made the investment to be able to look at those things and to see at every conversion point what's happening. But more importantly, the thing that changed before that is they said marketing is accountable for driving AUM growth. 1 and 2 don't believe that that is true. Levels 1 and 2 say that marketing is responsible for advancing the brand, whatever that means. But it's a mind shift. And when that shift changes, when that worldview changes, that's when you can start investing in metrics that matter.
Insight number 6, drum roll. Growers test and endlessly optimize, and it adds up. So I've referenced earlier, they're putting in the basic platforms to understand leads. They're thinking about who their best qualified leads are. They're thinking about how to personalize their marketing to these leads. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple as you go through the whole process. And then they're thinking about, how do they book those meetings? What's the cost of booking that meeting? How are they converting those leads? What's the cost of acquisition? And then, the magic is, I said earlier, systematically going through and optimizing that process. What did they learn? Which lead sources work best? How do they improve on the process? So, if you think about how that systematically plays out, it's a compounding effect in their business, right? They're making the smart bets at the front end of the funnel in terms of the prospects they should go after that are really a good match for their firm. They're systematically engaging with those firms, with those leads, so they have a better experience, higher conversion. You roll it out over 2 years. This was modeled on a client that has 10 billion assets under management. You could get to some pretty nice growth accumulated over 2 years.
Yeah, when you're able to focus on the leads that matter, when you can look at the data that's in your system and know which ones matter and which ones don't, and kind of put the ones that don't matter to the side, you don't just save a lot of time, you generate a lot more AUM. All right, last insight, and this is the one that really burned me, if I'm totally honest with you. The firms that are backed by private equity are growing faster. I don't necessarily know that that's a surprise, but I hoped it wouldn't be the case. But when I dove into it, there's a caveat here. So you guys remember this one. This is our, levels 1 and 2 aren't growing, levels 3 and 4 are. Levels 3 and 4 were all private equity backed. Down here, these and these were private equity backed. The others were bank, insurance company owned, and independently owned. Now, is there anything magical about the money and investment that comes from private equity as opposed to money and investment that comes from an independently owned firm or a bank or insurance? No, money's money. It all spends the same. So what is it that the private equity backed firms are doing that the other firms aren't? I was talking to somebody earlier today and he was saying, we're private equity backed. They want to see an absolute return on this in 24 months. And if they don't, then heads are going to roll. So that's one thing, but I don't necessarily know if that's, always the case, but it was funny. But these are a couple of things that they do. They make that worldview shift, that marketing is not here to make things pretty. Marketing is a growth driver, and we're going to treat it like a growth driver. We're going to invest in it like a growth driver. We're going to staff it like a growth driver. And that is a mind shift change that happens a lot of time once they enter the chat. They staff marketing to support growth, and one of the reasons that they're able to do that is because they bring a lot of outside resources to the table. Staffing firms, sourcing companies, so they're not just hiring a local agency to do something, they're finding the agency that is the very best on driving AUM from ultra high net worth people or whoever your particular ideal client persona is, even if it's outside the industry. They have incredible networks and they can find the people who are best at everything. But other organizations can do that too. We can all hire really good search agencies. We can all hire really good sourcing resources. They make the investment in technology and data infrastructure because they know that's the only way that they're going to know if it's working. So they demand that this happens. And then finally, that last one, they don't just look at the immediate payback. They don't just look at, I spent $3, that means I want to get $9 out of it this year. They look at enterprise value for a longer term. Even if that longer term is only 5 years, the goal isn't just to drive AUM, it's to drive longer term enterprise value. And they know that this kind of build drives enterprise value, so it's worth spending more upfront. It's just a different mindset and a different way of looking at investment, and it's one that almost anyone can adopt from any organization. So I have 24 seconds, and in that 24 seconds, this is the study that's actually published. So if you want it, feel free to grab that. The other one should be out in about a month. This is the one that looked at all of those leads, who was using them, how they were using them, how they were converting, and how those firms were growing. And then the other one will be about the big sample of the Barron's top 100 firms and their marketing practices, how they structure their teams, how they invest in their teams, their ownership, etc. All right, that's us and how you reach us, because we both got to go to breakthrough meetings, so we're not going to be allowed to stick around for questions. But please feel free to grab either of us over the course of the conference, or just reach out, and we are total dorks about this stuff, so we are more than happy to geek out about it with you. So thank you all for coming, and stay cool.